All right, so we're meeting again, and something that I've wanted to discuss with you, and I've discussed it with my wife and friends, other friends before, is faith journeys. And I guess it would be maybe important to sort of identify where I am, and maybe you could identify yourself on where you are.
Hmm.
I guess if you had a, if you wanted to say, Dom, what is your religion? I would say, I guess I'm probably Christian, which is an unusual distinction, right? Probably. It's like saying
Hmm.
I'm probably pregnant.
Right.
It's like either are or you aren't, Dom.
Hmm.
And I guess I'm probably Christian. Where am I more firm? I'm more firm in the idea of intelligent design, and we could get into that and more. But
Hmm.
the walk from intelligent design to the Christian conception of God, that I haven't fully completed that walk.
Hmm.
I still have areas of doubt creep into my mind and questions creep into my mind. But intelligent design, yeah, I've sort of embraced that,
Hmm.
and the fine tuning of the universe, that uh, life on Earth, that the slightest difference in parameters would make life impossible. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, the chances that this all came about randomly,
Hmm.
while they exist, they're not. It's not zero. It's not a
Hmm.
zero probability event, but it's so infinitesimally small that it's. I think atheism is as much a leap of faith, if not more, than
Hmm.
faith is.
Yes.
Yeah, that I think that. I think to say no, 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 it's all random, then you're talking about odds that are infinitesimally unlikely.
Hmm.
Infinitesimally unlikely.
Hmm. Right.
And then that's just for the creation of life. Then you look at a single cell, and the complexity in a single cell exceeds the complexity of a Saturn V rocket.
Right.
And I'm like, random? No, I know. I just
Hmm.
can't buy randomness there. It just doesn't make sense. And then you get into even bigger things like, well, what about just the concept of beauty? How did beauty arise?
Hmm.
Why would that be something that arises it just doesn't make much sense to me.
Hmm.
So I don't think I ever would have considered myself an atheist. Certainly I
Right.
was raised a Catholic,
Hmm.
um, moved away from Roman Catholicism, but never said no. I'm a dyed in the wool atheist.
Hmm.
But I'm on a journey, and the path I've re-engaged is the intelligent design path, and that for me is very, very compelling. It makes a
Hmm.
compelling argument. Um, Again, the walk from there to Christianity I haven't completed. Although I'll leave you with this before you give me your give us your side of this, is every once in a while, every once in a while, um, uh, and a series of things will happen in my life, um, and I'll get this. I don't know if I'd call it overwhelming feeling, but a convincing feeling that I'm being told that I'm getting a message. I, don't worry, I got you. I
Hmm.
got you. I'm in charge. You're not in charge. I'm in charge,
Hmm.
but I
Hmm.
got you. And why don't you just try trusting me a little bit?
Hmm.
Like that. And then of course I write that off as well. That you're you're looking for closure in a series of events. I try to like explain it right, but it's an odd thing that happens from time to time.
Hmm.
And then another manifestation of that is sometimes I'll like things don't go well, and I'll say, "Hell, what good are you? What good are you to me?
Hmm.
If you exist, what the hell good are you?" And then they'll work out, and I'll feel like sort of an idiot, and feel like literally, I'll feel like a child who got mad at his parent, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
say, "All right, you, you got me.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you're right. I should have trusted you. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and those moments are they're not enough for me to say, yeah, but they're breadcrumbs, along the path. So that's where I am.
Well, I think I can certainly relate to those. I mean, I am a devout Catholic. After a long faith journey, I grew up in the Baptist church. My father was a deacon in the Baptist church, head deacon in the Baptist church, and I found my way to Catholicism after again a long life of pursuing truth. I mean, that's everything I've done really is about that. I mentioned I was a philosophy major briefly. I, and my identity really is as a scientist in terms of, I've spent my whole life in academia, first as a student and then as an instructor. And all of that really has been about truth, the pursuit of truth. And that's what I want. I want to understand the universe. I want to understand this thing we call life. And so I was always motivated by what is true, not necessarily what I've been taught or what I've heard, but what is true. And truth, beauty, and goodness. Um, so so I've always that's sort of the backdrop. I mean, I've always been searching spiritually, and I do think some people are naturally more spiritual than others, and I think a lot of times people that difference is what distinguishes people who have that sort of unwavering kind of just understanding that God exists, and those who are more skeptical. But I think I can relate to all of those experiences, and I think most people can. And I think it's how you respond to those. And I think a lot of people, as you said, a lot of people initially at least will dismiss them.
Yeah.
I mean, even though it's their own subjective experience, they'll kind of just want to find excuses, and the skeptic in them doesn't want to just accept it
Yes.
wholeheartedly. And but that's what you have to do, because I think you can't find your way to God purely through intellect. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that, bright, educated people often do is does it seem logical? Does it, and we are not capable of fully understanding the universe. And I said that I want to pursue that truth, but I know I, in this world, can never understand the truth. No human being is capable of that. The brightest human being who ever lived can only get glimpses of it. And at the end, because we are so limited in terms of like some people want to reduce reality to what they can experience or what science can illuminate. And the reality is, first of all, our senses are so limited. Dogs can hear and smell things that humans can't. Doesn't mean that those things aren't real, that because we can't. I mean, they can their senses are more keen than ours, and they can detect a lot of things that we can't. Just because we can't see it, touch it, feel it, doesn't mean it's not real. And that should be, and science, human science is in its infancy. I'm sure that there are species out there far more advanced and can conceive of things and do things that we can't imagine. Okay, we cannot be so presumptuous to assume that, given our finite understanding, that we can rationally understand God. However, there are certainly people like Aquinas. I mean, I think there are some compelling arguments for the existence of God. But ultimately, I think that it comes down to experience. it comes down to that subjective experience. And if you talk to people who are firm believers, it is that experience, but you have to be open to it. I can't, at some point, you have to be willing to go with it rather than dismiss it, because it is, I mean, what you said there about trust me. That's so, you said a couple things are really very important. I mean, trust in God is what it's all about. And it's one of the most difficult things, not only for non-believers or skeptics, but for those who are believers. I mean, I think many people are very active in their faith. They attend religious services and they pray and they read the Bible, but really trusting God, that's hard.
Yeah, it's a
That's
surrender.
really hard. Surrender, yes. Surrender. That doesn't come naturally to us.
No, definitely not.
It's scary.
We're what helps maintain our mental health is an internal locus of control.
Yes.
And all
Yes.
of a sudden, that's an illusion.
Yes.
You know, yeah, you can maintain that illusion of locus of control, but you're not in control at the end of
Right.
the day. And
Yes.
that surrender is, it's extremely tough. Extremely tough. At the same time, though, if the universe is this cold-blooded, godless thing, well, you're not in control there either. You're subject to the randomness of the universe. So there's again an element of faith there too in atheism. So I think that's why that doesn't appeal to me. And again, the whole intelligent design evidence that keeps emerging. And there's I think it's called a Discovery Institute out in the West. Mm-hmm. One of the major researchers out there, I think his name, and I hope I'm not misattributing, Stephen Meyer, is a leading investigator and I guess philosopher too of intelligent design evidence. And not only in the things we've already talked about, the complexity of the cell, the fine-tuning of the universe, but also concepts like mathematics. Mm-hmm. That just the concept of mathematics, does that what the Bible refers to as at first there's the word, where mm-hmm. these thoughts, the human mind can discern those thoughts, but the human mind didn't create mathematics.
Right.
It discovered mathematics.
Yes.
So the mathematics exists independent of the human mind.
Yes.
So that alone tells you, well, then something can exist independent of the human mind. Mm-hmm. The mm-hmm. existence of math tells us something can exist that is reliable, that can be proven, mm-hmm. apart from the human, that the human mind can discern it, but mm-hmm. it's not dependent on the human mind. It is not a construction of mm-hmm. the human mind.
Right.
So it's not a big leap to say, well, if that can exist, then something else independent of the human mind, like God, can mm-hmm. exist mm-hmm. as well. And that's what moves me along. But here's where, then I would say in my I'll try to channel my frustrating moments. Mm-hmm. I'll say, yeah, all right, that's fine. Yeah, all right, intelligent design. I'm with you there. But this notion that there had to be this particular narrative theme that at some point in God's infinite existence, God, and I'm not even sure if this word makes sense, God decides that I'm going to create human beings. And I'm going to create them based on what I am. I'm going to create their spirit, their souls. And I want to have, and does the term "I want" apply to God? I have trouble even putting into language my thoughts about my conundrum here. God is a perfect being, so a perfect being cannot experience want. Want means there's something that I don't currently have. But
Right.
God is wholly content. God is whole. God can have no desires, can have no wants, because that would conflict with the idea of a perfect being. Perfect beings don't have wants.
Right.
So this notion that at some point this perfect being willed, and I know my language is imperfect, but just to get the point, wills the humanity into existence. Along this sort of narrative of creates man, man separates him, makes choices that separates him from God. And now we're all in this fallen existence, but we're not abandoned by God. But the narrative continues. The Old Testament narrative continues through all the events of the Old Testament, from Genesis to Exodus to so on, the prophets and whatnot, to the New Testament, sort of the fulfillment of all the prophecies in the person and God and Son of God, Jesus. Why at that moment in time? Why at somewhere by our calculation, the mid-Roman Empire did why was that the time that Jesus had to appear? Why didn't Jesus appear when we had recording devices and digitization and we didn't have to rely on oral tradition? Why not then? Was that part of, and I'm going to say things that are sort of pejorative, but in my anger I would say, why did it have to be when we had to rely on less reliable testimony? We could have had it in this time where there's more reliable testimony. But then, of course, the argument that I've heard is, yeah, but then it's less of, if God just says, here I am, okay, you're satisfied, miracle, 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 well, then it's not faith anymore. And now you're not a person really choosing out of pure free will to accept salvation. You're sort of scared. You're scared of this infinite being, and you're like, okay, you're the boss. Whatever you want, you could zap me out of existence at any time. And you're not embracing God. So I get that part I get, but it's the biblical narrative that seems, and I apologize for this, I know it's imperfect and needlessly pejorative language, but it seems contrived. That the narrative seems contrived. Like, why did it have to lay out that way? It seems like an odd series of events. Why did it lay out that, from literally Genesis, Adam, Eve, all the way through Noah, then Moses and the prophets, and then to the New Testament, Jesus and the apostles, and so that's the part I have trouble with, is the narrative seems, again, to me, a little contrived.
Well, I'm not sure if I understand why you think it feels contrived. I mean, one of the things that, a point that's often made, I mean, if we look at I'll stick to the New Testament. If we examine the narrative, the Christian narrative,
Yes.
this is not something that, if you were trying to start a religion,
Yes.
and you wanted adherents, you wanted people to flock to this religion, the Christian story is not what you would create. I mean, you've got a Messiah who is brutally murdered, executed, and there are a lot of, and even his own followers kind of thought everything was over. Our leader's been killed. Yeah. I mean, there are so many aspects to this that, I mean, this is not the story that someone would create from scratch in order to make themselves look good and to make their religion look good and, attract people.
I'll I'll push back a little on that.
Okay.
You might have your doubts after the crucifixion. Say, oh my, yeah, oh, maybe this wasn't true. But when the resurrection happens, hard to write that off as something other than I'm in the presence of divinity. And Thomas, the last one, holding on to a brief, is it really you, Jesus? Am I seeing you? And touch my wounds. You could say it was me. At that point, it's like, oh yeah. Now, if that all happened today, we'd record it. We'd have doctors examining, blah 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 blah, and it would be irrefutable.
But see, I don't believe that. I think the very people who deny it today would deny it if all that happened, even with the technology, with everything, there would be people denying it. There's no doubt in my mind that if Jesus came today, if we knew nothing about, like the scenario you're describing, where instead of coming 2,000 years ago, he came today, I guarantee you there would be skeptics. And in fact, to some extent, the technology now would almost feed into the skepticism. I mean, with AI, you can create anything.
Maybe right now is not the best, but how about in that interregnum period between oral tradition and reality distorting technology? How about when we had like photographs or video that for the most part captured what our senses perceived? Yeah, I guess again, you say you wouldn't come up with the Christian story, but remember look, I'd have no trouble believing if I got to put my hands in the wounds, if I got to see the loaves and fishes, if I got to see Lazarus back from the dead, I'd be like, all right, you're really stretching my skepticism to the breaking point. Hard for me to come up with a counter argument, Jesus. You got me. You got me. I mean, you're doing stuff that I can't possibly have another explanation for. So it did take some what's the word I'm looking for? Supernatural acts to sort of stamp it in. The most supernatural of all, the resurrection. The most when you conquer death, you've done it. You've sealed the deal. You've conquered death.
Well, maybe that's why he left us the Shroud of Turin. I mean, there's a lot of, again, people who are skeptical, skeptically inclined, dismiss it, but it's, to many people, very difficult to dismiss. I mean, there was this idea put forth a few decades ago that it was Middle Ages. That has pretty much been debunked. That was based on a contaminated sample of the shroud. But what we know, there's a lot we still don't know about it. But one thing we do know is that we don't know how it was created. There's an image that's entirely consistent with the crucifixion of Jesus, and in every detail. And even with all the modern science, we don't know how that image got there on that cloth. It was not painted. There's scientists today cannot explain how that image got on the cloth, which in a way is almost by its very nature supernatural. So there you go. I mean, as you just said, if he was resurrected from the dead, that's kind of game over. And if we have something that is strongly suggestive that happened, there you go.
Yeah, it's not quite putting your hands in wounds. It's certainly, for me, that it's not quite circumstantial, but for me it's not as compelling as, all right, there's a dead guy there. Dead. In fact, in the Bible, just take the Lazarus stuff. the concern was, well, don't go. The body's been dead it's going to smell. I think there's actually biblical like the
Right.
body's starting to decompose,
Right.
and no, he's not dead. Come on out, Lazarus.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm there witnessing, I'm like, whoa,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
what the hell? I mean, forgive me, what's I can't explain that. I think part of the explanation, what people were looking for is, oh, is he, an evil spirit? Is Jesus doing something evil here?
Mm-hmm.
But clearly it was supernatural. And, the loaves and fishes. I mean, we're talking about the creation. You're talking about violating one of the laws of thermodynamics. Creation of matter.
But here's the thing. Miracles still happen. That's the other thing. I mean, yes, Jesus is not physically in a human body with us. I mean, as Catholics, we believe he is with us through the Eucharist, but he's not walking around. But the reality is miracles of various sorts happen all the time, including Eucharistic miracles. And there's an interesting connection here. If you look, there have been many cases, and anyone can look this up online, of hosts that have turned, under certain conditions, have turned to blood, and that's a miracle. And what's really interesting, though, is and there have been multiple cases of this. In every case, the blood is always the same type, and it's the same type as the blood that's on the shroud. There is actual human blood on the shroud. It is not, and that blood on the shroud is the same, which, by the way, is the rarest of all blood types. Okay, it's AB, and which is another thing. If they tried to fake the shroud in the Middle Ages, I don't think we even at that point were able to identify blood types. So they wouldn't have known what blood type to use, and by chance, again, statistically, there would be less than 1% chance of it being that blood type, because that's the percentage of the population who has that blood type. It's rare blood type. That's the blood type that's on the shroud. That's the blood type that's in the blood in every Eucharistic miracle.
All right, and I haven't studied that, so I'll take your word for it, and that is very compelling. Just going back to my perhaps ham-handed use of the term contrived. What I mean is, why that story at that point in time? It's like the story. Why was that story even necessary? Why was that necessary? Why did it have to lay out that way? Well, I mean, it just seems like, I don't know. Of the infinitesimal different stories that God could have revealed him, her, itself in, that one just seems odd to me. It just seems like an odd story. That, all right, humanity is created at some. Again, I'm using language of the secular world. God exists beyond the secular world, beyond the secular universe. But if I want to apply timeline, God exists before humans did. Do we agree on that? And even does even the term before make sense as it applies to this? I don't know, but I'm trying to put this in terms that allows us to communicate about this. So God exists, but so somewhere along of God's existence, which is infinite, somewhere along that existence, what did God decide to make humans? And why would God decide anything? God is wholly perfect. God was perfect before humans were even created. So what was the point of humans?
Well, I think that I think words can lead us astray sometimes when we're talking about these kinds of issues. Because the terminology, part of it is translation from the Bible, and that's not always accurate. But also, that issue of our intellectual capacity as humans and the way we think about things. I think you made another important point there when you talked about, does time even make sense? Okay, no, I would argue it doesn't. God is outside of time and space. Time, when you're talking about the spiritual realm, time is irrelevant. Doesn't apply. In order for time, and this physics, time requires matter. Because time requires a physical universe. You have to exist in a physical universe in order for time to make sense. Yeah. Because it's always connected to space, which is why physicists use the term space-time.
Yes.
Okay? You can't have time without space. It makes no sense outside. Again, this is follows from Einstein's theory. So once you step outside of the physical and into the purely spiritual realm, there is no time. Okay. God lives in the eternal present.
I'll say so stipulated. What's the point of humanity?
That I have no idea. I don't know why we were created.
That's a stumbling block for me. A perfect being wouldn't create anything, because with no sense of time, space, the being is wholly perfect. It needs nothing new. It needs no additions. It needs no subtractions. It's wholly perfect. What's the point of humanity? What's the point of the universe?
Well, the physical universe is separate from God. So yeah, I agree with you, and I think theologians would agree with you that God is complete. God doesn't need anything. God doesn't want anything. God is complete.
Where did we come from?
But His creation, we're not literally part of God. We're part of His creation. Okay. So, that's the attributes. Those qualities we attribute to God don't necessarily apply to. I guess what I'm hearing you say is that you think that because we didn't exist at some point and then existed, that that's somehow an indication of an incompleteness on God's part.
A change. And perfection doesn't change.
God doesn't change. In fact, the Bible says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. God does not change. You're right.
Change happened. Why
in
did change
a physical universe?
Why?
Well, again, that's...
that for me is a stumbling block, because obviously we are a creation. The concept of God is we are a creation of God. So humanity has a rough beginning, a beginning of our universe. All right, why in the human conception of space-time did humanity come to exist then, even though... What was the point of humanity, of the universe, of everything that we understand in the universe? What was the point of that? Why did that emerge from God? Was it created by God? Why even does God need to create anything? Because God is, in other words, for me, a perfect thing is static. It has no change. It is static. It is the same, infinitely regressing and infinitely progressing. No change, nothing new under the sun, as it were. that for me is a stumbling block. Maybe
Well,
I,
okay. Can God, in your opinion, can God think?
I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna say no, because thinking implies that there needs to be a journey, a consideration from a conception now, either to a confirmation or a disconfirmation. God is wholly complete. There's no thinking necessary.
Right.
Everything has been figured out.
Yes, and you know what? That is certainly the Catholic teaching on angels. That they understand intuitively things in a way that humans have to think out deductively. Okay, they are imbued with all of this knowledge at their creation, and so in a sense they don't think either.
Okay.
But and again we get stumble on these the words and the I mean, think probably is not the best word.
Probably not. I'll try to boil it down even more. I'll try to get my own concept. I guess I'm asking a fundamental question. Is the existence of humanity incompatible with a perfect being that created this thing called humanity, the universe, beyond humanity, the universe?
Right, right.
In other words,
they go together.
Yeah, what was the point of creation? Why was anything created? God is perfect, so there's no necessity for creation, because
right.
in many ways, God think everything that humanity, whatever the relationship humanity and the universe has to God, pre-existed in God. For God, it pre-existed our existence. God could, and again, I'm using conceive of that before we even existed. He could conceive of humanity before we even existed. And he conceives of the very end before we exist. So are we playing out a play? Like God has written a play, and we're just actors in it.
Yes.
But actors with free will.
Yes.
But here's where it gets a little more complicated. If God knows, he's omniscient. He knows what choice Dom DePhilippis will make 5 minutes from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. If he knows right now those choices I will make then, do I have free will? In other words, can I choose in a way different than God already knows I'm going to choose?
It's not preordained. It's foreknowledge. He's not constraining your choices. He simply knows what you're going to do before you do it.
Then what's the point of, if he knows what I'm going to do, then all the teaching in the world, he knows how the play is going to work out.
Yes.
So right now, God knows who will be saved and who won't. So we're simply just playing out the string, aren't we?
Yes.
Playing out a string. Then what the heck is the point?
Well, I mean, this follows from physics. I mean, there are many physicists who believe that, again, follows from Einstein's theory of relativity, that basically everything that ever has happened or ever will happen is happening now. Time is an illusion, again, as we think about it, that it's all laid out already. And again, God sees it all. Past, present, future. He sees the big picture, which we can't see. It's all there. It's all done.
So stipulated. But then what's the point? What is the point of all of this? We're just actors in a play. What is the point? Is there a grand meaning of all of this?
I mean, I think that's. I guess I don't go there. I mean, I don't. I mean, I don't see it. I guess and considering that question and the issue of contrived, I don't understand how those questions or thoughts are relevant in terms of whether it's true or not. Like, I don't understand how that is a consideration for whether it's true or not.
Well, it could be true despite those things, I suppose, but that leaves for me a dissatisfaction. It's like, oh, so we are just playing out a string. So there really is no grand meaning here. We're playing out a play God already knows about. So, yeah, that decision I'm going to make in 5 years, God already knows I'm going to do. So why am I playing it? Why am I playing out that decision? What's the point? What is the point of me playing to satisfy to act out the role for God's observation? I mean, is that why I'm doing it? What am I doing?
I think every mainstream conception of God has always included omniscience.
And I guess at some point I have a problem with omniscience. Again, intelligent design doesn't mean you have to be omniscient. Again, see,
right?
You can have intelligent design by a super smart designer that's supernatural, but the attributions of total beneficence, omniscience, and omnipotence, I haven't arrived there.
Okay.
Why do those necessarily follow? I don't believe they necessarily follow. I think they could follow, but I have some questions about them.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think those are assumptions.
Yes.
And we certainly want to believe God is good.
Right. Yes.
So, yeah, but I mean, I agree that those are basically assumptions of how we've always viewed God.
Yeah, they're almost like geometric postulates. They're the
right
of the, and I guess I'm not ready to accept postulates yet. I guess
okay.
It certainly makes the Christian worldview and for the most part Judaism and Islam consistent. Those attributes are all part of the postulates of God in those major religions. So that's fine. I have no problem with that. I guess I haven't arrived where that all makes sense to me. And maybe again, I'm willing to accept that my desire for it to make sense might be getting in the way. That I just, like I said, I don't know for certain. I don't want to get I feel like I'm in an intellectual cul-de-sac here. So I'll take another point of concern I have, which is, how do I phrase this? Want to get my thoughts, try to get them somewhat to make sense here. What is my other concern? I guess another concern I have is that, well, I guess it's related. It's sort of like, and maybe I'm trying to figure it out as I'm going along too. I guess an answer, trying to respond to my own concern. An answer might be, well, the only way you could experience the joys of living and of love and of beauty is for you to have been created. So that's why you were created, to experience those things. Of course, I would push back on that and say, okay, was there another way to experience those things without needing to be incarnate, without needing to be flesh? Why there's this class of entities, beings called angels? Sounds like they got the easy job. They don't have to. They everything is apparent to them, as you said.
Right.
I don't know, if you asked me to choose, would you rather have been a human, Dom, or an angel? I'd take angel. I think I might take angel. I feel like I got the short end. I drew the short straw by getting human, because now I have to struggle with all this stuff. It's all apparent to them. I have to struggle with all this stuff. You follow? It's like, God, what?
Mm-hmm.
Angels seem to have gotten the great part of the deal here. You see, I don't know. I'm stumbling, but that's part of where I am on my journey.
So why couldn't it have been easier?
Yeah, it was easy for the angels, right?
Well, yes, yes. Although, a number of them left,
That's
which is,
right. According to
so I don't know how easy it was. What, a third of them left?
which, of course, is another part. Like, how could you be in the presence of God? In the presence, indisputable. In fact, not only the presence, you recognize that's God. That's
Right.
that perfection.
Right,
How
right.
could Lucifer say, you know what? I still, I'm not. I want my own, even though I'm weaker than you.
Right.
You're more powerful. I'm not omnipotent. How could Lucifer, this, by biblical description, super genius, come to the conclusion that, I want to take on this entity that I can't possibly beat?
Well, you know what? That's another thing. I totally get it. I struggled with that for a good while. That very question. How could you be in the presence of God and reject him? Well, it turns out, at least Catholic teaching, Lucifer never had the beatific vision. So he didn't look on God directly. He did not have that. So if he had, then no. He clearly would not have, he and all those who followed him would not have done that. But they did, and that was the thing I missed about this. They never had the beatific vision.
So they never really got to experience God.
Correct.
What? Is there an explanation as to what prevented, blocked, or otherwise impeded the opportunity to have a beatific vision? Why did Gabriel and Michael get it and not Lucifer?
Well, I don't know. I wish I knew the answer to that. I'm sure there is an answer to that. I just am not. It's been fairly recently that I learned this, within months. Because again, that was something that you always have these, even as a believer, if you're, bright person, curious person, you have these things that come up. But you know what? What's interesting is that every time I've had that, it's been answered. And that's why, it's fine to question things, but the presumption is that, as a devout Catholic, is that the church is probably right. And you just have to investigate to figure out the truth, because it's probably out there. And again, I wish I could go more deeply into this, but that's the short answer.
Okay, and again, without having researched it, okay, that makes sense. Is there regret now? It's like, oh man, were we wrong? Or have they still not had a beatific vision?
No, it's very much regret, because they know that they're doomed. They are. That's why they hate us. They hate the Blessed Mother. They hate everything. Their goal is to destroy us and separate us from God.
All the while knowing they can never truly win in the end.
Yes.
So they are maintaining an act of futility.
Yes. Absolutely.
Super intelligent beings engaging in an act of futility?
Yes. But there's an important point there. Intelligence. This is another reason why you can't reach God solely through intellect. intellect is not the sole thing that drives behavior. It's also emotion. And for humans, we're driven far more by emotions than by reason or logic. That interferes with being rational. Sure. Emotion often interferes with being rational. So simply being highly intelligent doesn't mean you're always going to make the right decisions. In fact, we know from research that people who are gifted intellectually lead lives that are comparable to everyone else. They divorce at the same rate. They do, all the same. They make all the same stupid, decisions sometimes that other people make. So, intelligence alone doesn't prevent you from doing really stupid things.
Although they're beyond our concept of it.
Right. Definitely.
Trained by
right.
the incarnate brain and
right, yes, and physical passions and the like.
Again, I and we could go other areas where I guess ultimately this is part of my journey, is to start to investigate things that would answer or satisfy these questions. But I guess, staying with the angels and humans, why create humans if you've already got angels? And angels can exercise a sort of free will of their own, like like either, I don't know if "choose" is the right word. They could have beatific visions or not have beatific visions. Okay, then why didn't just have that be the demons? Now demons would be the fallen, and they would need to be saved by Christ incarnate and Christ's sacrifice. What was it doesn't. The puzzle doesn't make sense to me. It's like, why did the creation of humanity enter into this story? Why did it enter? You had angels, you had fallen angels, you had God. Why introduce these new characters called humans in this physical world? It's more of a curiosity than it's not an argument against. It's more of just a curiosity.
And that's my point. That was my thought earlier when I said I didn't understand, like, how, when you say it's curiosity rather than an argument. I mean, the way it was presented initially, I was thinking it was an argument for the non-existence of God. But, and I didn't get it. I didn't understand that.
I guess I would say it's the curiosity of it makes it seem like I'm not seeing the point of the narrative arc here. Like, I'm conceiving of God as the great playwright, which may not even be the right metaphor to use. Why was this group of characters in this play called? Why did humans get introduced into this play? In fact, why was anything introduced in? Why this play even exists? And does it have to have a point? It would be a counter argument. It's like, why are you looking for a point? Maybe it just is. Maybe it just is. And the old saying of "it is what it is." There's no explanation. It is what it is. Okay, but I guess it would have more appeal in using a human term to me if it had some. If there were reasons for the introduction of, and again, I'm using secular human concepts and applying them to something that is obviously supernatural, and that's where my hang up is. But at the same time, getting away from that cul-de-sac, from intelligent design to the Christian concept, seems to me that there needs to be some steps filled in along the way. And then, of course, that begs a whole other set of questions, which I think are answerable, but I can't, I don't know enough. Is like, all right, what would a Muslim say? Why isn't their story the truth? Why is the Quran not the Bible the truth? There's some similarities. Jesus is referred to in the Quran, not as the Messiah, but as I think as a prophet.
Right.
So there's some historical correlations there, and I think you could find Malcolm X, a Muslim who said he had God, he had this supernatural experience. What about his experience of the supernatural? Was his not valid? Was the Christians more like? Why is that story not really the truth versus the Christians being really the truth versus the Judaism not wholly being the truth? How do we know from intelligent design where you might say, all right, we could start at Abraham. That's where the three major religions start. And then they go, well, Abraham, all right, intelligent design, maybe I could get to Abraham. But what about the divergent pathways after that? Why is the Christian conception the truth and not the Muslim or not the Jewish?
Well, I think the short answer to that is Jesus. And as you said earlier, the resurrection. And, first of all, I think when you're looking for truth, you look for corroboration. And as you pointed out, there is a lot of similarity between all the Abrahamic religions, which there should be, since they all can trace their roots to Abraham. And, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, all three. And beyond that, beyond those three, I mean, I think there's a general consensus about the basics of how we're supposed to live our life. And of course, Catholics would point to natural law, that again, we intuitively understand certain basic principles of how to treat one another. There's a research program at Yale where they look at very young children, and they're trying to look at the origins of morality, how morality develops. And we seem to have this natural instinct and understanding of how we're supposed to treat one another. And every major religion, all of them are going to say murder is wrong.
Okay.
I think they're probably all going to say adultery is wrong. Now, they might differ in terms of how many spouses you can have, but you shouldn't cheat on your spouse. You shouldn't steal things. You shouldn't, these are all things that are common across humanity, and that religions are fundamentally teaching the same things, and they differ in a lot of the more superficial things, and all of them, except ironically, Judaism, accept Jesus as a prophet,
as
you mentioned,
right,
as a prophet, not as not as God incarnate, the way Christians would see him, but they accept him as a prophet and his teachings. And so really it all comes down to, I think, the resurrection and the things we've already talked about. If you accept that, then you probably need to accept the fact that Jesus was the truth, the life, and the way.
Yes, I agree. And I guess I would say what we need is someone who's thought these things through and examined all the evidence and said, nope, like a Buddhist theologian, someone who's gotten advanced studies and said, yeah, because I don't have the knowledge to argue the counterpoint to the Catholic philosophical tradition. I don't have that knowledge. But I would imagine someone who gets a doctorate in theology, but is not a Christian, would have an argument, would be able to say, you bring up, Allan, you bring up the Shroud of Turin. Are you aware of X, Y, and Z?
Right.
I've said, here are the counterpoints to the Shroud of Turin. Here's the counterpoints to the resurrection. Because it's being presented a little too um, uh, uh, compelling. Like, well, this is evidence that is unassailable. The resurrection was truth. If it's absolute truth, then how could there be anybody that accepts? Like, unless you're a skeptic for the sake of being a skeptic. But if you're a true pursuer of truth, then you'll accept evidence.
But I don't think there are many people in that category. I don't think that many people are a true pursuer of truth. I think most people believe what they've been raised to believe, or what is self-serving. Yeah, but I'm a scholar and a scientist, and I don't think most people, and as psychologists, we know this. We know most people are motivated by most of what they believe is self-serving. Okay. And I mean, this is what keeps, I mean, people believe things that they want to believe. And if you are raised in a culture in which most people are, say, Muslim, that's what you're going to be inclined to believe. I mean, it's most people never take of all cross religions, most people never take a good solid look at what they believe. They just accept it.
But I'm talking about those people that did take the deep dive. You know, let's go to the Department of Theology at the Harvards and Yales and ask the non-Christians there, why are you not a Christian? You clearly have to get, I mean, I'm not a psychoanalyst, but I had to study psychoanalysis as part of my doctoral training. I can speak that language. Well, clearly, the theologian who's not Christian could say, well, here's the argument against the resurrection. Here's the argument against, and I'm not thinking that they are just wholly ignorant to evidence that would be so compelling that when presented to them, they'd have to say, you know what, I was wrong about this Buddhism stuff. It's Christianity that's the truth.
Well, I can direct you to a book by an author named Lee Strobel, who is, I believe, I think he was a lawyer, and his wife was a Christian. He was an atheist. He sought out to disconfirm Christianity.
Yep.
That was his explicit goal,
Yes.
was to debunk Christianity.
Yes.
He ended up converting to Christianity and writing a book on the process.
Yes. And I would say if that book and the argument was compelling enough for an intelligent person like Lee Strobel, why wouldn't anybody, and I'm not talking about your average person on the street who's busy with life, but people who dedicate their life to pursuit of truth, why wouldn't they pick that up and say, holy mackerel, Strobel's right. He's making the argument, wow, his argument, this is unassailable. Christianity is absolutely the truth. Shouldn't Strobel's text be the most, after the Bible, it should be the most powerful text in humanity, right? I mean, if it's that compelling.
I suspect there have been a lot of people who have converted as a result of reading books like that.
Maybe so.
I mean, people continue to convert to Christianity all the time, including people from other cultures.
Well, let me insert on that other cultures, because
okay.
The Christian narrative, and I don't use narrative pejoratively, just the tradition philosophy is you accept Christ's salvation. That's how you return to the communion of God. Is you accept Christ. You can't earn it. You can't. No matter what you do in this world, no matter how many good acts and deeds you engage in, it's the acceptance of salvation, of that gift of grace. Okay, what about the Aborigines off the coast of, I think it's New Zealand, who they can't even be exposed to the Bible because they are so insular that they attack anybody that even comes to their shores, and in fact, the governments in the area, Australia, protect you're not even supposed to approach that island for a lot of good reasons. You can introduce diseases, into that culture. But are they saved? They never heard of Jesus. They never saw a Bible. What happens to them? Do they have the ultimate disadvantage of having been born on that island?
First of all, there's no way to know for sure. There are different views on that. There are certainly even many evangelicals who would say that they're doomed. That's not the current view of the Catholic Church.
Okay.
If people like that never have exposure, an opportunity to accept Jesus, that it's possible for them. That's my understanding, that it is possible for them to be saved. So yes, I mean, I don't think that. Again, it requires free will is important in this discussion, and there has to be a decision on the person's part to accept or reject Jesus. And if that is not there, a similar kind of question is often asked: what about children, infants who are not, not yet right, who die before baptism or anything? They're able to, and that's actually something I think the church doesn't have an official view on, but priests will always say that we just we trust in God's love and mercy, and so I think the view is they are not, or the assumption, let's put it that way, is that they are not eternally damned. Okay, because again, they have no choice. They have no choice.
However, that's a blessing, because they were never given a choice, they could have never chosen wrongly. So they got communion with God, the ultimate gift of grace, without having the risk of having to exercise their free will, which makes me, part of me is like, well, in eternity, it's better to have died as an infant.
But okay, we're getting kind of deep in the woods here, but
absolutely,
there is a caveat to that too, because the church is not saying they're in heaven, but they're saying we can trust they're probably not in hell. But what I believe on this issue is they are not seeing the beatific vision. They are not in heaven. There is the ancient Jews had this concept of Sheol and the dead. And that's where, because I'm pretty sure that Christian teachings prior to Jesus, no one went to heaven.
Saved. You had to wait for the Messiah.
Exactly. And so, that was the place of the dead, but there were sections. There was the place where the bad people went, we call hell. But there was this other part that is commonly or sometimes referred to as the bosom of Abraham. And that's where, again, Abraham and the good people would have gone. And my guess is that that's where those infants are, is in the bosom of Abraham.
And again, that brings me back to a why question. It's like, why does it have to play out that way? Now we have all these sort of different planes of existence. There's the best, objectively the best, qualitative communion with God.
Yes.
And the way you get that, the only way you get there is exercising your free will to accept Christ's salvation.
Yes.
Okay? But if you die before the opportunity to exercise that, well, you haven't met the criteria for that, so you don't get that big prize. You get this sort of intermediate prize. You're not damned, can't really hold you accountable for not exercising your free will, but you didn't meet the prize. Doesn't that seem a little kind of like weird? I'll use the term weird. That seems a little weird to me. It's like, oh, now we have these multiple planes of existence. That sounds to me, as I'm going to use the term contrived, as string theory. We have this multiverse. We can't. So yeah, there's these multiverse. It's like, you know, I think the Catholic Church has created its own string theory. Come on.
Well, again, the Catholic Church has no official position on the state of souls of infants who died. I mean, and not, by the way, historically, people have often evoked the concept of limbo.
Yes, I've heard of limbo, where especially in reference to infants
Right. That's kind of historically been the way people are.
I remember that from my Baltimore Catechism days, way back.
Yes, but limbo, I don't think has ever been really official. Again, the church has sort of shied away from weighing in officially on that issue. So, yeah, but the layers that's always part of it. I mean, even if you just limit it, even if you do away with limbo and purgatory, which Protestants don't like, there's still, if you just reduce it to heaven and hell, there's still two different planes of existence.
Yes, but that's the integrity of that is consistent throughout. It's when we humans identify scenarios that don't fit with that. Oh, well, the church or whoever oh, well, you're not aware of this other dimension that explains that. And that's where I use the term contrived. It's like it becomes an intellectual invention to explain something that doesn't quite fit in the two-dimensional. There's God, there's not God. Those two existences.
Well, I think that may be necessitated by what we talked about earlier, by simply the constraints of our intellect.
Right. And I could accept. I have oddly enough, I have less trouble saying, you know what, Dom, you're sort of wasting your time. You're never gonna understand this. So the story is never going to be complete in your mind. There's always going to have to, because if the story were complete, then I could conceive of God wholly in the human mind, and then it's not God anymore.
Right. So we can't do that. We simply can't do that.
Impossible. So I get that. It's just, for me, it's more of like, it is that's part of my holding on to the locus of control is, no, I have to be able to conceive of it. I have to be able, it has to make sense to me. Then you're not surrendering, right? You're not surrendering. Right. The child, in trusting the parent, doesn't say you have to explain everything. The child, the toddler, runs to mommy and daddy with complete trust that mommy and daddy are the protector. And that's where I think children of God in conceiving of humanity makes sense. That's the sort of relationship that ultimately you're not going to understand. You have to trust. You have to surrender. And that's something I have difficulty with. There's no question about it. Though occasionally, as I started at the outset of our discussion, occasionally I get a clue. That I've got this, Dom. I've got this. You're just unwilling to totally let go, and that's and part of it is I actually take comfort, because what accompanies that feeling is, you know what, you could do this 1,000 times, Dom. I'm never gonna let you go. You're never. You could be mad at me 1,000 times. You could yell at me 1,000 times. I'm going to always be there. When I'm not putting it in precise language, but there's a sense of you're not going to offend me by being mad at me, Dom. I'm not going to be offended by it. I know you're going to get mad at me. That's okay. I made you. I know what's going to happen. And there's a comfort. I get that. It's just this thing, like I like closure. It's a human element of my thing. I like to have the story make sense, and I understand that's limiting. So we talked about the culture thing, and I think that the Aborigines, the infants, I think that's something the church or theologians should dive into. To have the story make a little bit more human sense. But at the same time, I think it's a plausible counterpoint to say, Dom, if it could all make sense, then you don't need trust anymore. If it all makes sense, you don't need trust. And if it all makes sense, you don't even need faith anymore.
Right, which means you don't need God either. I mean,
I don't need. Why we rely on the scientific method is because me having faith in a medication is not enough. I can't just the physician prescribes, say, take my word for it, this will work. No, I want. Did it go through randomized clinical trials, double-blind placebo-controlled trials? I need to know that. Because I don't want to base my decision to take this medication on faith. I want it to be based on evidence. Well, that demand doesn't work in the supernatural. There's evidence, but it's. I guess it comes down to, is there sufficient evidence that if everyone really gave it a fair trial, like Lee Strobel did, if he gave it a fair trial, I'm going to put the concept of God on trial, and I'm going to collect the evidence. Is the evidence, if everyone went through Lee Strobel's process, would everyone be convinced? And
well, I think that again, as in a court of law, it depends on what the bar is. I mean, is it completely airtight? I would say probably not. But is it beyond a reasonable doubt? I would say yes.
That's a pretty high bar. In other words, just to cast that another way, it would have to be unreasonable to deny Christianity. Unreasonable.
Well, what's the next level in the law? Preponderance of evidence.
Preponderance of evidence.
Preponderance of evidence. Let's take it to there. That it can definitely pass.
I'd accept
Christianity definitely passes that.
Yeah.
The preponderance of evidence.
Now we'll have to invite the lawyers. I think as I remember in my law and ethics class, I think the first level is clear and convincing, then preponderance of evidence, then beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes. I think that second bar, it probably meets.
And I remember a professor saying, think of it as like a little over 50%, then 75%, then basically 100%.
Right.
To think in terms of like a criminal trial, to think the person to convict them of guilty means, like fact, this person committed it's a fact to you. In fact, for you to deny the guilt, you'd have to be crazy, unreasonable to deny the guilt. That's how high that bar is. And I don't know if I agree with you. I don't know if the evidence that Lee Strobel, not worth trying to speak for him. It's unfair. I mean,
But what are your thoughts? It sounds like you're familiar with the book.
I've had this very discussion with my wife many, many times. My wife is not Catholic. She's Christian, which is a whole separate thing of, Christian versus Catholic.
Right.
Let's take a quick detour into your reference to Protestants don't like purgatory.
Right.
I have a problem with purgatory because my understanding, correct me, it's been a while. Purgatory sort of gives you an out. It says, you know what, while you were alive, you didn't quite make the right decision. But here, go pay a penalty for a while and earn your way into heaven.
No, that is I just recently had a discussion with a friend who's evangelical, and he had that same argument. That's not Catholic teaching.
All right, so
a lot of people are confused about this. Purgatory is for people who have already made it to heaven. in the sense that they've qualified. They haven't made it. They have qualified. They have earned. Yes. If you get to purgatory, you are going to heaven. Now, it's not clear how long you have to stay in purgatory, and again, it's not clear if time even has any meaning in this context. So because people, Catholics, like to talk about, how long but the point is, if you find yourself in purgatory,
whatever that is,
yes, you are going to heaven.
All right.
It is not a second chance. It is once you take your last breath, there is no second chance.
Right.
You're on your way somewhere. There is no second chance. Purgatory is for people, because the idea is that to be in the presence of God, you must be in a purified state. And the reality is most people aren't going to die in that state. And we're fallen creatures. Unless you are a saint at the time, and it doesn't have to be a recognized saint, but if you're attain that level of perfection,
you bypass purgatory.
You bypass purgatory, exactly. But for most people are probably going to go to purgatory, but that's just a stop-off point on the way to heaven. Those people are on their way to heaven.
I'm with the Protestants on this. Here's my problem with that. That diminishes salvation, because salvation was holy enough to get you to heaven. You don't need a way station. Otherwise, you're diminishing Christ's sacrifice. If you need a way station, then what Christ did was not enough. It was not. Then he didn't truly take your sins away. You're still stained by them. So you have to be washed more. That diminished. That I'll fight you to the end on. Purgatory diminishes the value of Christ's sacrifice.
That is so interesting coming from someone who was baptized Catholic.
Right now, that's the strongest thing I have. I think purgatory diminishes and denigrates salvation. And denigrates salvation. It says, no, what Christ did wasn't enough. You have to pay. There's an additional toll you have to pay. Nonsense. Nonsense.
Well, again, salvation is about whether you go to heaven or not.
And
that's what purgatory is about. That's the confusion. It's not purgatory has nothing to do with salvation.
But it's still, you're paying a debt. You're paying a debt if you're in purgatory. Christ paid the debt. Holy. The promissory note's been signed, sealed, delivered by Christ. Humans need not do anything else but accept God, and that brings us into communion. No way stations. No way stations.
Well, so basically, you subscribe to the idea of faith alone.
Faith, accepting Christ's gift of salvation.
Okay. Well, historically, Christianity's been around for 2,000 years. Historically, that was never the view of the church. That is a very contemporary idea. Like within the last few hundred years, the idea of faith alone. That was, there's so many ways. We don't need to get too deeply into the woods, but there are plenty of Bible verses that contradict that idea. I think it's interesting you say this is the one that you're going to, stand on this hill. This is actually a pretty easy thing to refute for biblical scholars and so forth. I think the argument for Catholicism, for people who are Christians, Catholicism versus Protestant, that argument is a lot easier to make than the argument for Christianity more broadly versus something else, or God versus atheism. I think the argument for, assuming you accept Jesus and so forth, I think the argument for Catholicism is a no-brainer. And a lot of it is just, we were talking about, you raised the issue of people adopting views counter to what they were raised with. There is a brilliant, brilliant individual who was raised as he was actually an evangelical scholar.
Okay.
Who converted to, after he studied, he was born in an evangelical family, I think, but he was an evangelical scholar. And he started studying Catholicism, and he converted.
Okay.
And he now has a show on EWTN where he talks about all of these issues. And he once referred to evangelical Christianity as being built in a house of cards. Okay, this is someone who was, not only was he evangelical, but again, he's that person who's bright, extremely bright, who knows the facts. He was a scholar, and he's a brilliant individual. And that's his view of evangelical Christianity. It's built on a house of cards.
I could use pejorative terms to describe the Catholic Church. I choose not to. He chose.
Yeah, but the thing is, this is someone who, again, as you said, he's a scholar in this area. He was an evangelical scholar.
That doesn't mean he might be retroactively, after going to Catholicism, over justifying his conversion. In other words, well, now I have to consider my prior beliefs built on a house of cards because I've made this leap to Catholicism. And I'm just purgatory alone gives me quite a bit of reticence about the Catholic Church. Quite a bit of reticence, because I honestly think it diminishes salvation. You are washed wholly by Christ's blood. You don't need another washing.
Oh, well, as I said, that I wasn't prepared to get into this too deeply, but there are I could go back pretty easily and look at the that's and again,
purgatory.
his name is David Anders, by the way, and again, brilliant guy, and he has the background, regardless of putting aside the sort of unflattering characterization. I mean, I think he effectively addresses all the criticisms. And I would challenge any Protestant to listen to what he says and refute it. And again, because nobody's in a better position to do it than him, because he was a scholar and he is a brilliant guy. So I would love to see that. If anybody wants to step up and challenge him, I would love to see it.
Yeah, so would I, of course, because I'm not prepared to. I don't have the expertise to. At the same time, he's a person who could be wrong. He could be wrong.
True, he could be. Anybody can, because again, we're limited.
There are brilliant atheists. I think they're wrong. They're still very, very bright people. They're just coming to the wrong conclusions.
But I mean, here's the thing. I think the problem I have to me, again, it's so obvious. I mean, as I said, Christianity has been around for 2,000 years, and for the first 75% of that, everyone was Catholic.
Right.
Okay?
And of course,
everyone.
Was the Catholic Church went astray of its original conceptions, and it was
but if you look at
to the way things.
But even if you look at what people like Martin Luther believed, his views were much more in line with modern Catholics than with modern Protestants. They have drifted farther and farther away with each passing decade.
I can't argue.
from the church's teachings. I mean, Martin Luther considered himself to be a Catholic. His objections were not over theology as much as it was the practice
Yes.
of corruption and so forth, which we're still dealing with. Okay, that's what theologically, his views were almost indistinguishable from what modern Catholics believe. In fact, that's why it's called the Protestant Reformation. Yes. He wanted to reform the church. He didn't see himself as creating a new church.
Right.
He was simply wanted to reform the church because there was corrupt and so forth.
Right.
So, where Protestants are today is so far removed from anything that Catholics believe up until the last few hundred years.
Well, I guess I would say we're painting with a little too broad a brush saying Protestants. I mean, there's so much heterogeneity in that classification. There's probably some Protestants that are extremely similar to Catholic teaching and others that are far further afield of Catholic teaching.
Right.
Where I fall in that continuum, I don't know. I could tell you that in my mind, anything that says there needs to be an additional step between Christ's sacrifice and communion with God, by definition, diminishes the act of Christ taking our sins on. By definition, it diminishes that act. Now, I'll have to research these biblical, but right now, it is hard for Dominick DePhilippis to come up with a way to square that circle. Maybe upon reading these biblical verses, I might say, oh, so that's how it makes sense. All right, fair enough. But right now, I can tell you that's a Grand Canyon-esque chasm for me to cross. But perhaps it's crossable.
But if you stop short of even defining yourself as a Christian, I don't understand how you could take such a hard line on this issue of Christ's.
Because I'm not, because I have doubts, my doubts evaporate more if I accept the salvation as the ultimate act of grace. If you diminish that, that raises my doubts even more. That makes me wonder if, wait a minute, salvation wasn't enough? I have to pay I have to go through the car wash twice? No, God washed me. I don't need to go through. There's no other interceding event necessary. If there's an interceding event necessary, it diminishes. I mean, it's practically arithmetical. 1 + 1 = 2. I'm saying it's just one act. Christ's sacrifice. That's all that was. If you add another, then I begin to, you're diminishing the central point of Christianity. And then that raises my doubts.
Well, if you're going to adopt that line of reasoning, then you can argue that a person shouldn't have to do anything. That Christ's act was sufficient. That every person who's ever lived is automatically.
And then you diminish free will. Then you diminish free will. You got to maintain both. You got to maintain free will, and you got to maintain the paramount and exclusive grace of Christ's act. You have to maintain both for this to have any consistency, any validity. If you create another step, the cake won't cook. It won't work.
Okay, let me ask you this.
Go ahead.
I think you're well aware of the fact, we've talked about the fallen state of humans.
Yes.
If you look at everyone you know, even those in the church, and everyone who goes to church of any type, kind of is going to get where I'm going. You believe, if you believe that all those people, if they accept Jesus Christ their Savior, etc., they've done whatever, okay, and they're earn their way to heaven.
Well, they would take issue with the term "earn." They would
Yeah, so would I. That was a slip of the tongue. But the point is, they're going to heaven. Okay,
yes,
you take these people and you put them all in heaven.
yes.
How is heaven going to be any different than earth? I mean, even if we remove the worst of the worst, we only look, just hypothetically, for the sake of argument, people who are in church, who've accepted Jesus, etc. You take those people and put them in heaven. How is heaven going to be any different than earth? Okay, my point here is even Christians aren't perfect. And if there's still going to be all kinds of bickering and all sorts of negative behavior, that's not heaven as most people conceive of it. We have a conception of heaven just like we have a conception of God. And we talked about earlier, omniscient, benevolent, etc. There's a conception of heaven. If there's no purgation, if there's no second washing, as you put it, heaven will be pretty much like here.
Completely disagree. You're using you're using secular conceptions of humans bickering. That once we've thrown loose this mortal coil and we are spiritual again, we don't engage in human bickering any longer. When we are in communion with God, the only pathway of which is to accept Christ's salvation, then bickering and even our relationships, as Christ himself confirmed, someone's spouse dies, you marry. Are you when the Pharisees or Sadducees were trying to trap Jesus, they asked him if someone marries, their wife dies and they marry their sister, who is their wife in heaven? And Christ says, you're applying those relationships don't exist in heaven. I'm no longer someone's sister, brother, father, mother, or whatever. We're in communion with God as spiritual beings. So I say that intensifies the value of the act of salvation, is that it not only washes us, it says once you've thrown loose this mortal coil, you are wholly in communion with God, which means all the downsides of human existence are gone. They're gone. That doesn't even exist anymore in heaven. Human conceptions of right and wrong, bickering, who's right and blah, blah, doesn't even exist when you're in communion with God.
So you're saying that all of those imperfections are the result of our physical body, our corporal state, and that once that is removed and we become pure spirit, then we will be perfect.
I think so, because there was a time we were in that communion, Adam and Eve, at least if we take the stories literally, which I have no reason not to at this point. There was a time they were in communion with God and then exercised disobedience. They separated themselves. Something changed. If they were in this flesh and blood, but they weren't subject to disease in that flesh and blood, right? They weren't subject to growing old and having prostate problems and whatever else. But when they engaged in that, then all the crap of human existence came with it. And I guess one way for me to make sense is maybe they weren't whole. They weren't our conception of human in the Garden of Eden. They were more in the spiritual realm. They didn't exist in the mortal coil. Maybe they took on the mortal coil as part of the fallen state. In other words, once you start, that's when you become human. So I would say, I heard someone, I wish I could give you the source, who said, we're spiritual beings in human form. And that makes sense to me. We are spiritual beings in human form. In other words, our true essence is the spirit, is the soul. The human form is part of our fallen nature. And we cast off, or I should say, Christ's sacrifice allows us to cast off that coil and be back in communion as spiritual beings with God.
But I think all of that is getting dangerously close to a heresy. We are both spirit, body, and spirit, and both of those are inextricably part of who we are. And after the final judgment, we will be reunited with our bodies. And so
That's Catholic. I don't know if I necessarily buy that. I don't think I know.
I don't think that's just Catholic. I don't think that's just Catholic.
Because that raises so many questions. At what age in this body would I be? Would I be like Dom DePhilippis 60-year-old, Dom DePhilippis 30-year-old, Dom DePhilippis 34 and a half years old? Yeah, this notion of me being back in my body, it just doesn't make any sense. Would I be would I be like essentially Superman? I'll be in a human body that can leap tall buildings in a single bound?
Yeah, it will be a different body. I forget the term that's used. It's a definite. It won't be the same. It will be. In fact, Jesus's body was different when he rose from the dead than it was before. And in fact, some people didn't recognize him, and there's some question about why that was. But he, after the resurrection, we will have, I think it's perfected bodies. For some reason, I'm blocking on the term. But so yes, I mean, the church teaching is that our bodies are not just shells. And that's a common belief. And as I said, there are various heresies about this. Our bodies, the body and the spirit are they're linked in terms of who you are. And the body is not just some meaningless shell that is, discarded like a snake sheds its skin. It's part of who you are fundamentally.
Yeah, that maybe the church would call that heresy. For me, I think that to be in communion with God, this gets in the way. He's spiritual. He
Right.
had to descend into human form to engage in the act of salvation for us, to save us. He descended into that.
Right.
So,
Well, intuitively, I understand. I see where you're coming from. I see where you're coming from intuitively. I think that is kind of in some ways difficult to understand that concept, because again, heaven is a spiritual realm. God is pure spirit. Angels are pure spirit.
absolutely.
And when we go there, initially we'll be pure spirit. But the idea is that after the resurrection, our bodies, they won't be the same bodies, but our bodies will be reunited with it.
Yeah, I guess that part of Catholic or Christian teaching, I have, again, for me, it does. I don't have a sense of, I'll use the term comfort with it. It just doesn't make much sense. It diminishes for me. It's like, well, all right, even if it's a perfected body, does it exist as matter? I mean, matter doesn't even exist in heaven. Energy doesn't even exist in heaven. All the laws of thermodynamics don't exist in heaven. So what's the point of having a body? A body is a vehicle to exist in the fallen world.
Right. Yeah, and I can't answer that.
Yeah.
I understand your view on it. I'm just pointing out that's not at least Catholic thinking, and I don't think Protestants. I think we're in agreement on that.
Well, I indict them all.
And by the way, even with that, there are more Protestants and Catholics agree on more things than they disagree on.
No question. I mean, everything else is incidental. The most important thing is Jesus died on the cross and saved you.
Right.
If there's disagreement on that, then then
Right.
the point in having the rest of the discussion.
Right. Yes. Because we're all in agreement. In fact, I guess there was just yesterday I saw there was some controversy over the fact that the government somehow is not officially recognizing Mormonism as Christianity.
Oh, I didn't say
And
that.
yeah, and I remember from my evangelical days, they don't consider them to be Christians, and I think it has to do with the Trinity, maybe the view of the Trinity, which is kind of a foundational thing.
Yeah.
But I'm not an expert on that. But yeah, in terms of we're all Christians, Catholics, non-Catholics, and the things that Protestants get have a problem with are things like purgatory, the role of Mary, a sola scriptura,
Right.
and the true presence in the Eucharist. I mean, that's basically it. That's what 5 things. I mean, that's and most of it,
That's a good summary of them. Yep.
yeah. So, but by and large, we are in agreement, and there's a lot of misconception about these things. And we discussed purgatory, but even after I pointed out, and the Protestant view of purgatory is somewhat inaccurate, but even after I pointed that out to you, you still have a problem with it.
I don't like it, and you know what? That and $2 will get you on the bus, so it doesn't matter what I like or dislike. But interesting that the role of Mary, I'll broaden that out. Even there's one of the things that I'll say rubs the Protestant community, and that's, again, I'm painting with a broad brush, the wrong way, is at least the perception, and I've tried to counter this, the perception that Catholics pray to saints.
Right.
And
right.
and I'll try to channel the Protestant objection to that and give it the steelman argument. I think the steelman argument the Protestants would make is, you don't need an intercessor. Mm-hmm. Jesus is the one you pray to. You don't pray. You don't say, Saint Anthony, help me. You don't need an intercessor. Mm-hmm. How dare you insert an intercessor between you and God? Who do you think you are to put another human being between you and God? God, that you go directly to the boss. You have a complaint, go directly to the boss. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm giving that argument a fair shake. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm trying to be humorous about it. But I think that would be the argument, is that no, you don't need intercessors. You don't pray. You don't make a prayer to St. Jude, St. Anthony, St. whoever. You go directly to the boss.
But you're not praying to them. You're asking them to pray on your behalf, which Protestants do all the time.
Do they?
They will ask someone from their church, "Oh, would you pray for me? We're going through this or that. Could you pray for me?" They do that all the time. That's what Catholics are doing.
Okay, if that's that, I'll tell you that it's not how often that is not the universal perception of it.
Exactly, and that's my point.
And I think the Catholic Church is partly to blame for that, because I think the Church should have one image in it: the cross. That's the only image that matters: the cross. Whether you want to put Jesus on there, as Catholics do, and call it the crucifix, which I think there's some good argument for that, or the empty cross, which the Protestants would say is even the more powerful image, because that wasn't the end. The end was the cross is empty. And I think having statues of saints, I think that could lead people astray. I could see the Protestant argument of why do you put statues of saints? After all, they're just people. They're other human beings.
Well, yes, but I think they serve a valuable role because they help show us how to live our lives. And the thing is, yes, Jesus was perfect, okay? He was fully God and fully man, but he was perfect. The rest of us aren't perfect. And when you have people, human beings, as you say, ordinary human beings living out holy lives, that's really helpful. That to be able to look to those role models, this is how you do it, and to have lots of different ones from different walks of life, different vocations, who can illustrate how to live out a holy Christian life. I think that's valuable.
It can be. I don't think it is absolutely good. I think it can lead astray. It can diminish the folk, because they didn't. A saint didn't necessarily need another saint, right? And if you just follow the teachings of Christ, that is sufficient. Do that. There doesn't need to be another model. There doesn't need to be another example. Follow the teachings.
I mean, yes, in terms of understanding, again, for salvation, but people all the time in our daily lives, we're confronted with situations and we're not totally sure how to manage them. And I mean, Jesus, we can't really look to Jesus' life. I mean, I think the epistles, Paul's writings were designed for that purpose to a large extent. He was telling people how to live out their lives, and so. But Jesus himself, I mean, first of all, his ministry was only 3 years long,
right?
And there's only so much you can put into those 4 gospels, and the gospels are really about understanding his role as Savior, not how he lived on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we don't know a whole lot about that.
I don't know enough to say this, but my question would be, are Paul's letters... Hold on one second. Are Paul's letters... Are they ever phrased as, follow my example? Or are they phrased as, Jesus basically said, this is how you ought to live your life?
Yes. It's not about him personally. It's about, this is the way you lead a Christian life. This is what you should be doing in your church.
And he discerned that from the ministry of Jesus.
Yeah, from his as being one of the disciples.
So I guess I would say, wouldn't the pushback on the need for saints be, everything you need is in that book called the Bible. Just study that. Study that. You don't need St. Dominic, you don't need St. Anthony, you don't need St. Jude. Study the Bible. In fact, any attention you're paying to these other humans that isn't attending to the Bible, you're not getting you're not going to the source. You're getting essentially spiritual hearsay.
Okay, no, and that's probably a good argument from that's probably what a lot of Protestants would say.
Fair enough.
But now you're getting to the issue of sola scriptura, which again is an easily refutable idea. I mean, the idea that everything we need to know comes from the Bible. And the fact is, the Bible itself doesn't say that. If you believe that, the Bible is the sole authority, then the Bible itself should say this book is the sole authority. It doesn't. So if you believe that, you are, ironically, refuting what you believe. Because if you can only believe what's in the Bible, and the Bible never says it's the sole authority, then how can you believe that?
Does the Bible say it's not the sole authority?
No, but it doesn't say it is.
Your argument on yourself.
And again, if you, throughout most of the history of Christianity, it never was. This is a very, very new idea. I mean, basically, if you're adopting positions that would have been rejected by Christians for 1,500 years.
Alan, the church itself thought the earth was the center of the universe until Galileo came along.
No. The church, I don't think, quote unquote, the church necessarily believed that. And the church doesn't go into a lot of issues of that nature officially. And which is why I think many of us believe the church should not weigh into positions of whether it's global warming or all these other issues. That's not the purview of the church. And so I don't think it's the case that the church said that, but on matters of faith, I mean, that's why the church exists. And I mean, the idea that you can just start changing things, I mean, there's all sorts of problems with that, going down that road. And that's why we've got, hundreds of different denominations of non-Catholics, all believing different things. As you pointed out earlier, some of them are closer to Catholicism. Others are entirely off the reservation. If you don't have the central authority of the church, anybody can interpret the Bible as they see fit. And what you get is all of these various denominations who all believe different things, none of which, vast majority of it, incompatible with the first 1,500 years of the church.
I think that historical precedent is not enough, because clearly the church had beliefs that it was wrong about. So the fact that it was historical doesn't mean it's true. There's even been bad popes, like the ones put in place by the Medicis, for example. Whereas the Borgias, my history is not so great there. I think the Catholic argument would be the thing that is enduring is anything issued by the papacy ex cathedra. That's where the infallibility comes in.
Right.
But anything that's not ex cathedra, you can debate. It's not infallible.
Right.
So I guess we have to go, what really falls into that rubric of ex cathedra versus everything else that's come out of the Catholic Church?
Yes, agreed.
And I don't know. I don't know how those buckets, what fills each of those buckets. But I think ex cathedra is a very exclusive bucket. I think most of what issues from the Holy See is not ex cathedra.
Right. That's true.
Yeah. So I don't know what. I guess I would have to say. Now I'm very curious. What are considered ex cathedra issued infallible truths about God?
But those are most of the things, those are the central things that you are expected to believe as a Catholic Christian. A lot of the other things, just, they're not central.
Okay.
So, again, if a pope starts pontificating about global warming, I mean, that's not something that we are bound to accept.
Right. So what was, I don't even know, what was the last ex cathedra proclamation that the church made? I don't even know, to be honest with you. I have no idea. What was the most recent infallible truth?
Oh gosh.
You don't have to answer that. I don't know what it is.
Well, no, I don't know either, off the top of my head.
Because maybe that's what the church has to get back to, is sort of like, you know what, focus on the ex cathedra stuff. That's the important stuff. All the other stuff, like you say, it's all sort of up for debate. And I think the more those accoutrements accrue, you diminish attention to the central tenets.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if they would focus on the central tenets, there wouldn't be as much division. I think there's even a division in the Catholic Church that was amplified with Vatican II. That there's still a lot of Catholics who think that was a mistake.
Yes.
Vatican II was a big mistake. We should still be practicing the Mass in Latin and so on and so forth. So, I don't know.
That's become a huge issue that for some reason is increasing in significance, which is odd as we move farther and farther away from Vatican II. It seems like there's this growing hostility toward it. And there's, I mean, I know people in that camp.
Yeah, I think Mel Gibson is in that camp. I don't want to misattribute, but I think he was on the Rogan show, and they
Right,
had
right.
this discussion. And I think he's in that camp. I don't know I couldn't speak intelligently about the nature of the accusation of, oh no, that the Vatican II, the church. I know that I saw a clip, and you shouldn't take clips out of context. So I'm gonna beg for the forgiveness if I'm taking it out of context erroneously. But I remember in that clip of Gibson talking to Joe Rogan, it sounded like even the election of Roncalli, Cardinal Roncalli, who then became John the 23rd, that there was some shenanigans with that with that papal election. And if memory serves, there was white smoke and then black. There was contradicting indications of a settled election.
Right. I've heard that. Yes.
That's as far as my knowledge goes of it.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you ask me what I would prefer,
Go ahead.
in terms of the churches, I mean, I'm not real happy with Vatican II either, and I became a Catholic long after Vatican II, but I enjoy a Latin Mass, and I always would prefer to receive the Eucharist while
On your tongue.
kneeling and on the tongue, kneeling and on the tongue when possible. And I think there's some arguments for the traditional Mass and so on. So my preference would be for a pre-Vatican II approach, but from what I know of the differences. But at the same time, I'm Catholic. And my belief is, as a Catholic, I'm obedient to the Holy See. And so ultimately, it's not my call. I prefer the traditional approach, but part of being Catholic is obedience to authority, because otherwise, as I said, we're back to, that's what distinguishes us from the Protestants. Otherwise, if you remove that central authority, you are going to end up with all of these various approaches that are going to move farther and farther away from the true church.
Fair enough. And I say where we might arrive at some common ground is your obedience, I think, should be to the ex cathedra stuff. It shouldn't be just global obedience to whatever the Holy See says. It should be to the ex cathedra
Right.
proclamations, if that's the right
Right.
term. So,
Right.
I think you could be a disobedient Catholic who's obedient to the ex cathedra stuff. You could say, Leo, you're wrong, and I'm not going to follow what you're saying, or
Well, yeah.
or whomever,
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that if you frame it that way. I mean, believe me, there are a lot of things I disagree with Pope Francis about. So, yeah.
Yeah, when they're exercising that in scripture interpretive role that the Catholic Church says is infallible.
Yes.
As if Jesus himself was saying
Right.
things.
Right.
That's what you have to be obedient to that, because if you're not, it's as if you're being disobedient to Christ himself. That has integrity for me. If the church kind of stuck to that, I might back in the church's graces. But I have more of a problem with where the church has gone than that. If it stuck to the ex cathedra, maybe there is no Protestantism. Maybe there's no divisions at all. I don't know. Again, I have a lot of work cut out for me. I have to read more Lee Strobel. I have to go and find the teachings of this former evangelist who's now a Catholic. What's his name again?
His name is David Anders.
David Anders. So I got Strobel, I got Anders, and I got to research what's ex cathedra and what isn't. And
Yes.
it's going to help me along my journey. That's more.
Yes. You got a full plate there.
I got a full plate. But
Yeah. But yeah, I would
I'm intrigued by these things. I mean, well, ultimately, what the hell is more important, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And a lot of people don't want to take the time. And so they take the path of least resistance and they just dismiss things because they feel, I don't really believe that. You know, but we're talking about eternity. Okay. So at least, I mean, you dismiss it if you study it and find it lacking. But as we said before, most people never take the time to do that. What's more important?
I agree. There's nothing more important. There's nothing more.
Right.
Of course, from an absolute terms, there's nothing more important. It's
Right.
maybe the church or churches should engage in more teaching of how do you give appropriate levels of attention to that instead of just a sermon on Sunday. Like that should be carved out maybe every day of your life. Carving out time to introspect, to study the Bible, to think about these things. You know, that to help you identify the evidence around you that is yelling, God exists.
Right.
You know that I think that would be a much more fruitful exercise of the church evangelizing people to the Word than how things are going now. And you might say, what's leading to we won't get down this rabbit hole, but unfortunately our tribal politics, I think, gets played out when, as you alluded to, and I agree, the church starts dabbling in politics, in political issues. Then it's easy to put the jerseys on.
Right.
I'm on this team, you're on that team. And then you've diminished the church, because there's a concept I've heard some Christian athletes refer to as like audience of one. It's like there's only one team. There's only one team. All the rest is bullshit. There's are you on Team Christ or not?
Right.
That's period.
Right. Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why, I mean, that's where my thinking is right now. I really couldn't care less about the politics because that's all that matters.
And that's where I think we should conclude, because that I'm in complete and whole agreement on. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the team. It's an audience of one. At the end of the day, it's my personal relationship with God. That is it. That's the whole ball of wax. There's no wax outside that ball. All right. So
All right.
Publish a 2.5 hour.
Well, we're just a little over 2 hours, but definitely.
Only the truest believers or haters will tune into us. Cheering each of us on at their various points. Give it to him, Allan.
Oh, no, I think that was a really lively and interesting discussion.
Great
discussion, yeah. I won't even call it a debate. That was a nice discussion.
Yeah. And again, I'm on a journey. I am no way at an end point. No way at an end point.
Well, you know what? I don't think anyone is. I don't think I'm at an end point either. A spiritual journey is just that. And I hope, you don't want to ever get to a point where you feel like you're done until you're dead, because you've got growth. And most of us, we're striving for perfection, and most of us aren't there yet. So it's a continual pursuit of perfection to become a better Christian every day.
Yeah.
So that's what it's about for me.
We're seeking, but we'll never get on our own a perfect union. So there we go.
Right.
We're drawing the Constitution and
Yes. Yeah. All right. I guess that's another show.
That's another wrap. This is a long one. Yeah. This is for after we build our audience, we hit them with this one.
Okay. All right.
So we'll reconvene next